Hello, JDs and Lents, as our own John Lennon would say, and welcome to the pre-Chicago Fest for Beatles fans edition of She Said, She Said. I'm Lanea Stagg, the culinary chef and author of the Recipe Records series of rock and roll themed cookbooks. They are certifiably delicious and contain some of your favorite rock songs such as Jello Goodbye, I Am the Eggs Man, and Rock and Roll Hoochie Couscous, just to name a few. Each book also contains rock history, trivia, and playlists for you to enjoy as you whip up these amazing dishes in your kitchen. In short, Recipe Records is a party in a book. Try them out once and you'll be hooked. You can check out the series at my website, laneastagg.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free newsletter and rock blog. And if you're ever in the heartland, in Evansville, Indiana, that is, come by and say hi to me at the gym that my husband and I own, the historic Pit Barbell Club. Any day now, we're opening the Pit 2 on the east side. Our motto is no carpet, no sauna, just iron. And we will get you back in shape.
I mean, she will do it too. She has been keeping me motivated and in shape for the last 10 years. And I'm one that, like, about every month, once a month, every 2 months, I'm like, that's it, I'm done, I quit. And she's like, no, you're not. You're going to keep going. And she's a great motivator. So if you're near Evansville, anywhere near Evansville, go by the historic Pit Barbell Club. It's one of the most historic clubs in Indiana, and she will whip you into shape. And I'm also a huge fan of the Recipe Record series. I've got all of the books right here with me. This one is the Culinary tribute to the Beatles, and there you can see the stuffed Sergeant Peppers on the back. But it doesn't just have recipes. It also, as Lanea said, contains a lot of rock and roll stories and history and why things are named certain things. I think you'll be really interested. And here's a great idea. If you aren't the cook in your family, give it to the cook, and it'll be a treat for you as well. You can just sit back and reap the rewards. Hello to you all. Thank you for being with us today. We always appreciate the gift of your time. I am Jude Southerland Kessler, the author of the John Lennon series, a series which was thought to be at first one book, then 3 books, then 9. I'm pretty sure right now it's going to be 10 because book 5 was so large I had to break it into part 1 and part 2. It came out just a few months ago, and this is it. You can use it at the Pit Barbell Club for weights, hand weights. This is the first 8 months of 1965, and part 2 that I'm working on right now picks up as the boys get on the plane to go to America for the 1965 North American tour. And it encompasses not only that tour, but what we're going to be talking about today in large part, which is after they came home, the frantic and yet amazing creation of Rubber Soul and how they managed to fit that in. The books are all very meticulously researched and far too slowly documented. It takes too long to do that, but it takes you on a journey with the Beatles as if you're there. You read it as if it's a narrative, but it's all documented. And hopefully Lanea will have her books and I will have my books, and our special guest today will have his books August the 12th through the 14th at the Chicago Hyatt Regency O'Hare. We want to meet you. We want to be able to finally, after 2 years, get to see you face to face, sign our books. So if you haven't made your reservations for the Fest for Beatles fans, you better get on it. And even if you can't get at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, there are lots of great hotels that are within walking distance. So it's a beautiful area, lots of great restaurants, great Chicago deep dish pizza, lots of things to do. All 3 of us encourage you to take part of that. And I'd love to send you home with a copy of Shades of Life and a free few Lennon goodies as well.
Absolutely. And we just received good news in this past week that the John Lennon series has been accepted rightfully so, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives. So congratulations to Jude. It so is worthy of being in those archives. It's very important. So Jude and I are celebrating today by having one of our favorite guests and friends on the show. He's a noted guest speaker at Abbey Road on the River, Beatles at the Ridge, the Grammy Museum Beatles Symposium, the White Album Conference, the Fest for Beatles fans in Chicago, New York, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. He's also the creator of the questions for the Trivial Pursuit Beatles Edition game. And hey, that's not even his day job, which is being a respected tax attorney in New Orleans, Louisiana.
I'm telling you, he reminds me of that song by Heart. He's a magic man. Da, 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 da. I mean, I don't know how he gets this stuff done. First, he created a whole series of books about the Beatles recordings and pressings and the variances and differences between the two. He is without a doubt the Beatles Effenpedia. That's what we always call him. He is a musicologist. He knows everything there is to know about the Beatles music. And he did that whole series. So that was the Beatles on Capitol Records, part 1 and 2, the Beatles Swan Song, get it, the Beatles for Sale on, you guessed it, Parlophone Records, the Beatles Are Coming, great series. And then he has now turned his attention to a fascinating Beatles album series. And being an English major, we call what he did here starting in media res, which means you start in the middle of the action. That's how all the great books are written. You start in the middle of the action, you either go forward or you go back, kind of the way Star Wars did their series. So he started with, and he can correct me if I'm wrong about this, the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper, A Fan's Perspective, which is slap dab in the middle of the career, followed it up with the Beatles Magical Mystery Tour and Yellow Submarine. And we have, of course, the Beatles' White Album and the launch of Apple, which I'm pretty sure came out in 2018 to celebrate that anniversary when we all went to Monmouth University for the White Album Conference. Then the Beatles get back, get it, to Abbey Road. I love it. These all have such clever titles. And the Beatles finally let it be. But of course, they didn't let it be, because now we're going to go back and get the earlier albums. And so we are fascinated and riveted to hear about the brand new book, which is coming out on the 10th of October. But if you pre-ordered, we may have some good news for you. And to welcome to She Said, She Said, our dear friend, Mr. Bruce Spizer. Woo-hoo!
Oh, great to be here. Great to be here. Always enjoy sitting around talking Beatles with people that know their Beatles.
Well, we know you know your Beatles, that's for sure. And welcome. Is it scorching in NOLA?
It is, but it's scorching all over the world these days. So it's more humid in New Orleans.
Yeah. Lanea can attest to that, can't you, Lanea?
Oh, it's miserable here. Miserable.
Yeah, you guys are having a real heat wave in the Midwest from what I hear. Well, Bruce, we have so much to talk about that we're going to go ahead and jump right into it, because you're not just covering one album, you're covering two. This book is covering from Rubber Soul to Revolver. So what gave you the idea to put these two together? What do they have in common? What drew you to making a book on both of these LPs?
Well, I grew up in the United States. And so for us, we have the Rubber Soul album. Then we had this strange little album, Yesterday and Today. And then we had another new album, Revolver. And so that's how the music was presented to me. And I thought, it kind of is an interesting time period because it covers December of 65 through the end of 1966, essentially. And I thought, if I did a book like that, and I started it with what happened in the UK, because you have to do that. My later books, or my earlier books, depending on how you want to look at it, started up with a chapter about what went on in the United States, because that's the music I grew up with. But to tell the story of Rubber Soul and Revolver, you must begin with the British. And, when I was doing a bit of a research, I remembered in the back of my mind that George had said he always considered Revolver as Rubber Soul Part 2. So I thought, these two albums would work really well together. It would, give me a way to cover Yesterday and Today in its proper context. And in addition to that, from writing about what was going on in the world, it would give us a very exciting year of late 1965 through 66. And a lot went on in news, a lot went on in music, a lot went on in film. And as your listeners may know or may not know, the way I approach these books is I start off with, if you were living in the United States or in the United Kingdom, what would you have learned as these records were being released and as songs were being played on the radio? So we open up with a chapter on the UK, then a chapter on the US, and then we also cover what was going on in Canada. And my good buddy, or all our good buddies, Piers Hemmingsen, writes about what was going on in Canada. And then there are other things, like in this particular book, of course, we'll talk about it. You have to cover the butcher cover. But I also get people to write about what was going on in the world. And who better to do that than the wise old man, Al Sussman.
Right.
And Al has been an editor with Beatle Fan for many years. He's also written his own books about changing times and things like that. So it's a lot of fun when Al sends me a chapter. It's a lot of fun to edit and put the right images in and things, and really enjoy working with Al. And then Al this time also wrote about the great music that was from that period, 1966. Incredible music, not just the Beatles. And then Frank Daniels writing about film, but not only film, but also, because Frank loves comic books, as do I, some very important comic book issues from that time. So that kind of sets the stage. And then the middle section of the book is one of my favorite in every book, called the Fan Recollections, where we have people, just everyday people, write in and write about their memory of, first hearing Rubber Soul or first hearing Revolver, or buying a copy of Yesterday and Today and then learning there was something underneath, and steaming off that trunk cover and seeing a butcher cover underneath it. It's been great. Both Jude and Lanea have written Fan Recollections for me. Sometimes Jude writes such an incredible piece, I have to give it its own chapter. And I'm always happy to do so for Jude. It's wonderful to get something from her like that. And then the final section of the book goes through how the covers came about and how the songs were recorded and the albums were put together. So it's, a lot involved. In the Fan Recollections, I also get fan recollections from, Bill King, because Bill, being the editor of Beatle Fan, would do these sections every now and then called fan notes. So Bill's worked out well. So it's really been quite a crew to put together to do these books. And, I've really enjoyed doing them. It was going to be a book on Sgt. Pepper. And of course, even before the book came out, people knew about it. Well, of course, you're going to do a book on, got to do the White Album. Next thing I knew, we're just doing a Beatles album series.
Yeah.
And that's how it came about.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're great. They're really so excellent. And I love hearing from people, because even Mark Lewis had wrote you a fan's recollection. In the Sgt. Pepper book, great photo of him with his Sgt. Pepper outfit on as a young boy. And it's so many celebrities. Who are some of the celebrities that you've had that have written your fans' recollections?
Yeah, some of the ones that, one of the ones that I really was very pleased with was getting something from Billy Joel. And he told the wonderful story of how he first heard Sgt. Pepper. He said, no one's ever asked me that before. And his story was, of hearing the album for the first time. And I hate to give away a punchline, but it's such a great story. And the idea was he had broken up with his girlfriend, but she invites him over, and he goes over, and there are a bunch of people there, and there's this fancy turntable, and they put on headphones, and they hand him a joint. And he had never smoked a joint in his life before. And he's listening to Sgt. Pepper and smoking a joint for the first time. And he said when it was over, he realized he was taken to a whole new world. And he said, but it wasn't sure whether it was the Beatles or the pot. He said he went out and bought the album. It was the Beatles that took him to that new world.
Wow.
You can't make that stuff up. another wonderful one was I knew someone who was a friend of Peter Tork, Karen, who many people know from
Yes.
the Fest for Beatle Fans from Chicago. So I asked Karen, could you ask Peter to write something? And she said, sure. And 2 months go by, and I figure, well, maybe nothing happened. So I shoot her an email, and she writes me back and says, Bruce, I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask him. I'll send him an email now. So 20 minutes later, no more, I get a return email from her. I'm expecting her to say, Peter said, I don't have time, or I'll get it to you next week. Instead, she says, this is what Peter wrote.
Oh,
Now, how heartfelt was that? In 20
wow.
minutes, he told me his story. And what he wanted to do was hear it in the best stereo system in the Valley, which, of course, meant going over to somebody in the Byrds. And so he went over to Crosby's house and heard from David Crosby's house. Crosby wasn't there, left the key under the mat. There he is sitting in Crosby's house listening to Sgt. Pepper.
Wow. It just reminds me so much of what is that line from Summer Rain? Everybody kept on playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
and that's how I opened my chapter on the book was, with that, because I think it said it all.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was the actual line, the first time they sing it is, and the jukebox kept on playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was not possible. When Johnny Rivers recorded that song, unless you were in Italy, you would not have had that on a 45 that could have been played on a jukebox.
And you know how many people would know that? That is good. I love it. That's what makes you the authority. And I mean, you know this stuff, and that's the truth. Well, Rubber Soul, without a doubt, is one of my two favorite Beatles LPs. And everything changes. Everybody calls Revolver the pivotal LP, but with Rubber Soul, suddenly all of the love scenarios are very complex and mature. It's no Moon Spoon Croon June, very complex. Women have become completely different. Whether it's the girl and what goes on, who is not very nice, to the girl and girl, who is certainly no sweetheart, to the aggressive women, both in Norwegian Wood and Drive My Car, you're dealing with a different animal than you have in the other LPs. And yet the boys did this with no time. What got them through, Bruce? They only have Wait recorded. That's it. Everything else is new. How did they manage it?
Yeah, I mean, what happens is, and what I love about doing these books is I go back to that time frame and I look at all of the British weeklies. I mean, there were 4 major British weeklies and other publications, and of course, the Beatles book for the fan club. And Johnny Dean talked about Paul, and what Paul basically said, was the cupboard's completely empty. It's bare.
Right.
And we need to write some songs to go into the studio and record. They go into the studio, they record some songs, and then they have to stop going into the studio because they need to write more songs. And and you get all this wonderful information from Melody Maker, New Musical Express, and things like that. The Beatles book, and you learn so much because it's exciting. Because as a historian, I'm not interested so much in what someone thought about the album 20 or 30 years later. I want to know what they thought about the album when it came out or before it even came out, where they're learning about these albums well in advance, particularly when you get to Revolver. We'll talk about that later. But the remarkable thing is, under incredible time pressure, the Beatles knock out these songs, and out of the songs that they recorded for the album, and also Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out, not a bad standalone single. That's 16 songs on that album. Out of those, 8 appear on the Beatles Hits Collection. No other album comes close to that. 8 songs from the Rubber Soul sessions are considered among the Beatles' absolute best.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that's really incredible. Well, one of the things that you do is to talk about the reviews immediately after Rubber Soul or Revolver or whatever was released. And you do a thorough coverage of what was said on both sides of the ocean about the LP. And I had to smile because you mentioned that Richard Green from the Record Mirror dismissed Girl as sad and weepy. Weepy. I bet John Lennon could have smacked him for that. He called I'm Looking Through You and the word dull and ordinary. The word dull and ordinary. But he dubbed one of my favorite songs, the Potboiler, the strong closing number, Run for Your Life, as the best track on the album. So if we put aside what I consider to be highly unfair criticism of a song that was written in 1965 and based on a song that was written in 1954 and recorded by Elvis in 1955, and the judging it by the standards of 2022 is just cray-cray. So if we put that aside, what is the strength of this closing number, Run for Your Life?
Yeah, it amazes me that, it was an upbeat song musically.
Yeah.
So it's catchy, got a hook. I'd rather see a dead little girl than to be with another man. Sounds great.
Yeah.
But when you sit down and listen to what John's saying, ooh, boy.
Yeah, I started listening to some of the others that didn't get censored, like Hey Joe, which no one said anything about, or songs, that were written like Johnny Get Angry, Johnny Get Mad, Give Me the Biggest Lecture I Ever Had. All of those were accepted. Only John Lennon gets pinged on. But it is, you go back and look at the closers of Please Please Me, Help, Hard Day's Night, they're all potboilers. Yep. And look at this. It's a good song.
Yeah, I mean, John always said, I've always hated Run for Your Life. And I think it was because he kind of felt, well, I lifted the opening lines of a song and just knocked it out. It's no big deal. But it was the one that really got a lot of attention. And I found that fascinating because to me, I certainly wouldn't call it my favorite track on the album. I would say In My Life is one of my favorite Beatle tracks of all. So, of course, that would be my favorite track on the album. And I agree with you. How could any reviewer say any song by the Beatles was dull and ordinary?
That just made me laugh. It really made me laugh. Well, in probably early August, the Beatles all went to Brian and said that they felt that they were being overexposed. George Harrison famously said, even I'm sick of seeing this. Everywhere we go, in every shop window, on buses, on billboards, they're the Beatles. And Paul really petitioned Brian to do away with the 1965 UK tour because they were so pressed. Brian at first says he's going to do it, and then he backtracks while he's in America and says he won't. What are your feelings about the 1965 UK tour? How did they do all they did, Bruce? How did they fit all this in?
Yeah, it was, they worked great under pressure, obviously, because in less than 2 months' time, really 1 month time, they put out this great album in studio time, but, another couple of weeks to write the songs. And we've already talked about how they're really the best songs the Beatles have ever done. They also begin experimenting in different sounds. In particular, you have Norwegian Wood with sitar on it. George in the film Help had seen the sitar. And it always, things seem in the Beatles to work out for a reason. You wonder that if George Martin had been musical director, would they have come across a sitar? Maybe. George Martin had used it in Peter Sellers' record, so maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But nonetheless, you have sitar, and it really, is fascinating. John is playing an intricate acoustic guitar part that he has trouble with, and when he finally gets it right at the end of the take, he says, "I showed ya." And it's, and it's fun. It's John being fun with it. And so many of the songs are using the acoustic guitar, which was used heavily in a lot of the Help sessions. And what's interesting is, Capitol did things differently. And for Rubber Soul, it's very similar to the UK album, but it also is different in that it drops 4 songs, but it adds 2 that were left over. Capitol hadn't put them out because they did a Help soundtrack album rather than a Help album with songs from the film on one side and other Beatles songs on the other. So they had these 2 songs left over, and they thought, well, we'll use it on Rubber Soul, and they both were acoustic sounding songs. I've Just Seen a Face, which had been buried on side 2 of the Help album, but here it's the opening track, the pop boiler to open the album, the acoustic guitar intro that just grabs you and pulls you into the album. And the album has so many acoustic guitar songs, and then side 2 opens with another acoustic guitar song, It's Only Love. And then you get a song like Girl, and there's debate as to whether or not a Greek instrument, a bouzouki, is used or whether it's acoustic guitars. And different people remember different things. I think it's probably acoustic guitar played simultaneously, but maybe one day we'll know for sure.
He capoed it up, right? Isn't that what he did? He capoed it up. So it would sound.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because George Martin says he remembers John using or the bouzouki being used. Yeah. And then Paul says, no, that's not true. He capoed up the guitar. Mm-hmm. So two people in the same room on the same night at the same time, history is slippery.
Yeah. And we don't have pictures from that session. Now, what's great is we have pictures from the Michel session. So we know that Paul capoed up his bass guitar on Michel, which is kind of interesting. So it gets a very different sound. And you have all these different acoustic guitars, wonderful solo that George plays, that George Martin basically had, worked out with him, and you just have wonderful things like that. In My Life, where they know they're going to put a solo, they're not exactly sure what, they leave it empty. George Martin has this idea for this piano solo. He wants to play it really, really fast, but he's not sure he can get it quite the way he wants, so they record it at half speed and speed it up. So when you listen to it, not only sounds fast, it sounds like a harpsichord, but it's really a piano.
Yeah, I love the image of John and George Martin sitting next to each other at the piano. John had already recorded that as a guitar solo, didn't get the sound he wanted. And George Martin says, well, I could do it on the piano. And because John can't write music, he's going, duh. George Martin plays it with one finger, writes it. And then John goes, duh. And then he plays it and writes it. And John's recording it note by note, vocally, while George Martin is writing it. I mean, it's genius. How does something like that happen?
Yeah, it's amazing. And the result is an album that's a real game changer.
Yes.
And it's the album that inspired Brian Wilson to do Pet Sounds. And bear in mind, Brian Wilson was not listening to the British version of Rubber Soul. He's listening to the American version. Now, and I get asked this all the time, well, what's the difference between the two? The American one is more of an acoustic folk song dominated album. The British one, there's more variety. You open up with Drive My Car, a really good rocker, and you have If I Needed Someone, Nowhere Man, which could fit on either version, but it's only on the British. And so people say, well, which one's better? And what I tell them is it's like comparing a great red wine and a great white wine. It's not fair to compare which is better. They both have their own subtleties, and they both will get you drunk.
I love that. I so love that. Well, it is, we could talk about Rubber Soul forever. I mean,
and how about that little throwaway single? We Can Work It Out in Day Tripper.
Yeah. And you take Nowhere Man, which gets overlooked really, which inspires Brian Wilson to do I Just Wasn't Made for Times Like These on Pet Sounds. And then Pet Sounds comes back and inspires the Beatles again. It's amazing. But we've got to look at Revolver. So I'm going to turn things over to Lanea and we'll move ahead.
All right. So we are moving into 1966. And in the early part of that year, John tells New Musical Express that the next LP is going to be very different. He says it's going to have electronic music, jokes, and literally anything. Of course, he's referring to what will become Revolver. Was John right? Was Revolver a markedly different LP? And if so, what made it so singular in the Beatles catalog?
Well, it's funny because George says it's Rubber Soul Part 2, but I don't think so. It's totally different.
I agree.
It's the same in the sense of, once again, the Beatles have done 14 great songs. And that's the similarities. The thing about the album is the Beatles, for the very first time, used the recording studio as an instrument of its own. They use the electronic, the tape loops, and all these other things on Tomorrow Never Knows, and all sorts of other things. They bring in, a string quartet for Eleanor Rigby. They bring in Alan Civil to play French horn on For No One. They do all these things to make the album really special, getting sounds they never had before. And they also use something that was invented for them by the engineer at Abbey Road, Ken Townsend, artificial double tracking. And the story of how that comes about is a wonderful story. I had the pleasure to interview Sir Ken Townsend at his home. What a humble man. He picks me up at the train station, and he's going to drive me to his house for tea and an interview. And of course, we walk to his car, and I go to get in, which I'm sure is the passenger side. And Ken jokingly says, "Oh, do you want the keys and drive the car too?" And then I realize, of course, I'm on the wrong side because I'm in England. But wonderful man. And I said, well, tell me some fun little stories. And he says, well, I was giving John a ride home one night, and he was complaining about the fact that I'm just tired of coming in and, overdubbing my vocals to get that wonderful sound. What can you do about it? And Ken came up with artificial double tracking. And what they did was, rather than John singing it twice, John would sing it one time, and then they would play it slightly out of sync. And by playing it slightly out of sync, it sounds like two different voices, even though it's the exact same voice. So that's what artificial double tracking is. And the Beatles did it on the vocals, but then they got the idea of, we could do that on the instruments too. And they got real excited about using it. And, and John would get these crazy ideas, like for Tomorrow Never Knows, the song that was going to, be like Ornette Coleman, what he did to jazz, the Beatles were going to do to rock and roll. And there were some reviewers that made that comparison, and so that was fascinating. But the idea was, he tells George Martin, I want my voice to sound like it's, the Dalai Lama up in the mountains. And so what do? They run his voice through a rotating Leslie speaker, and it gets at that sound. One of the reviewers, when he reviewed it, said it sounded like John was singing from Abbey Road. Well, today we go, well, of course he was in Abbey Road Studios. What a dumb thing to say. No, what the reviewer meant was, because at the time it wasn't called Abbey Road Studios. It was called EMI Studios, which was on Abbey Road. And what he meant was, it sounds like John was outside the studio singing from Abbey Road, the street. And that's what he meant. So you get those little fascinating little things in these contemporaneous reviews. What's fascinating about Revolver is when the Beatles went to Germany, they brought a recordings of it, and it wasn't the greatest quality, but the reviewers and reporters from England who had came to see the Beatles perform in Germany to write about it, they're like sitting in the Beatles hotel room, and it's like, hey, do you want to hear our new album, essentially? And they're hearing these songs, and then they're writing about it. So what happens is, a couple of months before the album hits the stores, if you lived in the UK and were buying these music magazines, you knew about 11 of those 14 songs, which is fascinating. And not only that, but you'd already heard the single Paperback Rider Rain in both the US and the UK. Boy, did that sound different. Imagine, for somebody, and look, a lot of people argue, what was the first heavy metal song? John says Ticket to Ride. I don't know if I agree with that, but I got to tell you, Rain, that checks all the boxes. The drumming by Ringo, that heavy sound, boom, boom, the whole bit. And then, of course, Paperback Rider, just the wonderful bass sound on that. Paul used the Rickenbacker on Rubber Soul, but the Rickenbacker sounds a lot different on Revolver. What happened was the Beatles basically said, look, we want to get the sound that the American records have, the Motown records, the Stax records in particular. And to get that sound, if you guys can't do it, we're going to go to Memphis and record there. Well, of course, the British engineers at Abbey Road were very offended by the idea that the Beatles had to go elsewhere to get a good sound. So they worked to get that sound at Abbey Road for the Beatles, and they did.
Fascinating. So speaking of Rain, I was intrigued at your collection of reviews in the book from the fans and the critiques for the single that most fans did not care for was Rain.
Yep.
But Penny Valentine, a professional singles reviewer, begged to differ. Tell us a little bit about the differences between fan opinions and critical opinions of Rain and backed with Paperback Writer.
Yeah, one of the publications invited about a half a dozen fans to come hear the new Beatles single and give their reactions. And most were not impressed, not even with Paperback Writer. You know,
Wow.
It was so different. And I think that's what threw them. And a couple of different people had made this point when they were reviewing Beatles singles. They'd say, it has to grow on you because the first couple of times it's so different than the one before that you have to get used to it. And that was really the case with this new single. There was nothing like it that the Beatles had ever done before. I mean, you hear this wonderful Beach Boys type harmony open up Paperback Writer, and then Ringo hits that drum and bam! And all of a sudden you've got this great guitar riff, which of course I at the time thought was George, but later learned it was Paul. And then Paul has this great bass part. He's all over the place with that bass guitar and the, immaculate vocals and everything about the song. And then there were things about the song that I didn't notice until I heard it on CD where you could really hear it carefully. It's like, oh yeah, in the background, they're doing Frere Jacques. How cool is that? But there were people in the UK, and one of the fan recollections, this guy Gary Marsh, his French teacher knew right away that they were singing Frere Jacques in the background, so that's how he knew. And you get these wonderful little things, but for many people, this was the single where I think one reviewer said, it wasn't a music magazine. I think it was a newspaper. Said, if this had been by anybody else, no one would give it any attention. It's terrible.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, I know. What? How could they?
I have to tell you a funny story, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but my son, we're going through Sonic. He's in high school, and I'm driving him through Sonic to get one of those big gulps. And Paperback Writer is on the radio, car radio. And he says to me, hey, Mom, I finally figured out what made the Beatles so great. And I said, okay, what is it? And he goes, Paul McCartney's bass playing. I said, get out of the car. Just open the door, get out of the car. He goes, you can't make me walk home over that. Get out of the car.
And of course, Jude, before you hit the kill button, he's right. It wasn't just Paul's bass playing. But what was happening was that they began recording differently, particularly when you get to Sgt. Pepper. But what they were doing is they would lay down a basic track sometimes without Paul's bass part. And then Paul in his head would hear this great bass part and he would overdub his bass. And that's why you get some of these fascinating bass parts. Paperback Writer, prime example. Paul cannot be playing bass live because he's playing that lead guitar part. So now Paul is, he's got the headphones on and he's sitting there and he's laying down this incredible bass part, the whole bit. And so when they changed the way they recorded, it also changed the way the records turned out, and it gave Paul the freedom. Now, there are other songs where Paul and Ringo are playing that bass and drums in tandem, like Tomorrow Never Knows. So you get different things. Sometimes Paul is playing the bass live, sometimes he's overdubbing it. And it really makes a difference as to how the song sounds at the end of the day.
Yeah. He was definitely impressed. I was not impressed with the assessment, but anyway, I did not make him walk home. Okay, so the times they were changing, and Bill Miller is now replacing Dave Dexter at Capitol Records. And so we get Yesterday and Today, an unusual collection that, of course, is not seen on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And Yesterday and Today has 4 of the songs that were supposed to have been on Rubber Soul, or were on the EMI version of Rubber Soul. And we weren't allowed to hear those songs from, December. I guess Rubber Soul came out December 3rd and December 6th. And we don't hear them until June of the next year in 1966.
Well, not entirely, because 2 of them come out on an American single. We have
that's true. That's
Nowhere
true.
Man,
yes,
and What Goes On.
That's true.
And the other thing is there are radio stations that sometimes get the British albums and they play the songs. How do I know that? Because I'll look at a chart from a radio station and, at number 20, is Nowhere Man before the
Wow.
Nowhere Man single comes out.
Wow.
And even in fan recollections, I had someone, she was, I think, from the Chicago area, and she wrote to the radio station, how do you get these songs? And they gave her the name of a shop in the UK. So she has not only Beatles 65, but she has Beatles for sale. I mean, how cool is that? And so some people were getting it. But what makes it so different is that for most Americans, we get these songs later. We get the great singles because we've got Day Tripper, we can work it out. We've got Yesterday, Act Naturally. And the other fun thing is, when Bill Miller is programming this album, he wants 11 songs. And he just says, look, I've got 8 songs right now. I'm 3 short. I could do Paperback Writer and Rain, but that single's brand new. Why do I want to hurt the sales of that single by putting them on the album? Hey guys, what you got? Oh, we're doing this great new album. Yeah, but your new album's going to have 14 songs, and we're only going to use 11 of them on our album because we don't want to pay that extra royalties bit, And so, in the U.S., royalties were 2 cents per song. In the U.K., it was the entire album divided by the number of songs. Different way of doing it. So the idea is, look, we're only going to use 11 of them on the next album. Why don't you give us 3 of them now? So George Martin looks at the songs they have. Can't give them Tomorrow Never Knows. That's just so different. Can't give them Taxman because that might open the album. We'll give them these 3 songs, And Your Bird Can Sing. We'll give them that one. We'll give them I'm Only Sleeping. But the problem that George Martin doesn't realize, he gives them 3 John Lennon songs, which makes Yesterday and Today probably one of Jude's favorite albums because it has these wonderful John Lennon songs on it. But what happens by doing that? When Revolver comes out in the U.S., John must have taken the day off because Paul has 5 songs. George has 3. Ringo has 1. John only has 2 songs on the album.
I told you, I think I wrote it in my fan recollection.
You did.
I'm playing it over and over going, what can I like on this record? What can I like on this record? I don't want to not like a Beatles record, but I don't like this record because if you don't, it was very John. There was a dearth of John
Bacon.
Yeah, John Bacon. It really was. Well,
and look at what John's 2 songs are. Tomorrow Never Knows and She Said, She Said.
Yeah, and if you're not really into the heavy metal sound, which I wasn't.
Yeah, they're very, very edgy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was about as edgy as an eraser.
Yeah. So. Now, can we talk about the covers a little bit? And
that's what I want to talk about. Go.
And by covers, I don't mean that Act Naturally is a cover version of a Buck Owens song.
I know that.
If you look at the Rubber Soul album cover, Robert Freeman by this time wants to do something different. Like he's always done something different. But this one he wants to use different tones and he's going to use these darker tones, and the Beatles are wearing these, suede leather jackets and the turtlenecks, and they're taken against a background shrub at John's house. And he's showing them the different pictures. And while he's doing so, one of them gets distorted and kind of falls. It gets bent. And the group sees it bent like that and say, hey, can you do that? He says, of course I can. I can do that in the darkroom on the enlarger. And they get that done. And rather than just having your normal typeface setting, the idea is let's have a Rubber Soul logo, have Rubber Soul written some way. And the artist's conception when he thinks of it is, well, Rubber Soul, what of a rubber tree? If you tap a rubber tree, it begins to flow out of the tree. And so the idea is to get the letters to kind of flow out, and comes up with this incredible logo. Capitol, for the first time, says, yeah, we're going to use the same cover and the same album title. They hadn't done that since With the Beatles became Meet the Beatles with the same basic cover. Capitol covers had always been different. But for Rubber Soul, they see something so wonderful and unique that they use it. And they even, as much as it killed Dave Dexter, the name The Beatles doesn't appear on that cover. And one of the things Dexter said, our covers are better than the Beatles covers because we market them by putting the Beatles name on it. Well, this time he can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable cover, a maturing Beatles, as it were, to go along with the songs. So we're going to move forward to Rubber Soul, and we'll go backwards to Yesterday and Today.
Okay.
Revolver, Robert Freeman, because the album's called Revolver, gets this idea of a photo collage with sort of like a record with different layers going out. And it just doesn't do it for the Beatles for whatever reason. They don't particularly like it. And they talk to Klaus Vormann, do you have some ideas? And he gets the idea about doing a pen and ink. But there's something missing with the pen and ink. And he gets the idea, what if I make it a collage and I put all these different little pictures in it? And he does it. And the Beatles really like it. And it's a stark difference from anything they've done before. It's a black and white album cover.
Yeah.
Yet it's remarkable cover. And it gets nominated for a Grammy Award because it's such a remarkable cover and wins.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about those two remarkable covers. But wait, there's more. And most of it, the biggie, and it's written about incorrectly so many times. And the butcher cover chapter in this book, which for me, I'm going to tell you, that alone will be worth buying the book just for that chapter, even if we didn't talk about Rubber Soul and Revolver. The butcher cover chapter, I think, is like 48 pages long. It has all the essential Bob Whitaker photos and other things, that were telling that story. And what's great about it is that, you look at the cover and, and everyone says, and what I titled that chapter was, Mommy, did Capitol really butcher the Beatles? And the answer is no.
And that is a long-standing thing. I mean,
absolutely,
you're in groundbreaking territory here.
Yeah. And what people said was the idea was part of the point of the butcher cover was Capitol butchers the Beatles. The Beatles say, look, photograph us in butcher smocks and raw meat and decapitated baby dolls, and we're going to stick it to Capitol with this brutal visual pun. Not true at all. What happens is that Robert Whitaker had done some Beatle photo sessions. Take a look at the album Beatles 65. Not a British album. What's the cover mean? There are 4 different pictures of the Beatles. It's the 4 seasons. Whitaker was into themes. You look at them, one they're wearing coats, one they're umbrellas, and one they're holding springs. It's a spring photo. One they're raking leaves. You get the idea. It's the 4 seasons. So he gets the Beatles back together again. And for the next session, he does a few weird things. We're going to have the Beatles with polythene. And this picture's not really used anywhere, but I have it in the book. And it's a fun picture because it's uncropped. And you see this girl off to the side holding these giant polythene sheets. I don't think her name was Pam, but maybe not. But who knows?
Possible. It's possible.
They also, one of them is, behind this giant Salvador Dali looking type eye. So these are the things Whitaker's done. So now Whitaker's going to do another Beatles session. And Brian tells him, we need a publicity shot for the upcoming tour. So at the beginning of the session, Whitaker does that. He takes a standard picture of the 4 Beatles. And in the book, we have a picture of a photographer from the Beatles book who's there. And he takes a picture of Whitaker taking the picture of the Beatles. And we see that Whitaker has an assistant there taking pictures at the same time. Why is that important? Because for the so-called butcher session, when we get to that, they're both color and black and white pictures. Now we know there were 2 photographers. So it's a very important thing. So anyway, the portrait's done. And now he's going to take some other things. And he has Paul hold up a question mark. That's kind of cool because they don't know where they're going. And he has the idea of, I want to do something with the theme of, and you can't make this stuff up, well in advance of knowing about this Yesterday and Today album, the theme of Yesterday and Today.
Wow.
So what are we going to do? He wants to show the birth of the Beatles. How do we do that? Well, how about showing an umbilical cord coming out of a woman? So he has the Beatles hold a string of sausages up to a woman's belly, and that's birth of the Beatles. Then he has other ideas. Well, mortality and death. Oh, I'm going to have George hammer nails into John's head
I remember
Why?
that one.
Yeah, to show the Beatles are like anybody else. They're flesh and blood. If you hammer a nail in their head, they'll bleed. Okay. Then he's got one of Paul holding up a bird cage with George's head in it. Why? Because the Beatles sing like canaries. And also, although he doesn't say it, I think he's thinking the Beatles are a prisoner of their own success.
Right.
And then to break the image, we're going to do these things with the butcher smocks and the death and the whole thing. And the idea is a bunch of these different pictures are going to be put on one album cover that'll have a gatefold inside, and it's going to put halos above the Beatles, and it's not going to be by itself. Very crazy concept idea, but it never went anywhere. Well,
Wow.
Tony Barrow comes to the end of the photo session. Tony was a Beatles publicist.
Right.
And he goes back and he says, Brian, I've been told they got the publicity photos we needed. Some really weird stuff happened at the end of the session. Don't worry, these will never see the light of day. And that's basically what they think. And so, in the meantime, Capitol lets Brian know we're coming out with a new album and we need something for the cover. And as fate would have it, Whitaker's going to be at Brian's office about some other things. For one thing, he wants to show the boys the photos from what we call now the butcher session. And Brian says, well, as long as you're there, grab your camera and your equipment. Let's get some pictures of the Beatles. So what's around Brian's office? A steamer trunk. So They take a picture of the Beatles around the steamer trunk. And that is done. Brian sends a copy of that to Capitol in the U.S., a colored picture of the Beatles around a steamer trunk. And yes, you read things differently, but that is the first cover for Yesterday and Today, what we now call the blue trunk or the purple trunk, if you want to give it a wrong title, because it's really a blue background. Now, why did Capitol come up with a blue background on the side with yellow, Yesterday and Today, the Beatles in yellow and the song titles in white? The album was called Yesterday and Today. Why? Because it had yesterday on it. And so they took the color scheme from the Yesterday picture sleeve, blue, yellow, white. And so that's why they use those colors. And off to the other side, for 2/3 of it, the picture of the Beatles in Brian's office with garish-looking curtains in the steamer trunk. That's going to be the cover of the album. But for Brian's intervention, it would have been. Brian, for whatever reason, tells Capitol, even though Brian sent him the picture, I want to see the cover. So Capitol sends him an image of the cover. And Capitol wants to get the presses rolling for the album cover. And Brian looks at it and he doesn't like it.
Well, it's a horrible photo of the Beatles. They look furious.
But Brian sent it to him.
I know.
It's Brian's photo.
I know, but they do look really mad in that photo.
Well, we got to get a picture taken again.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but he takes the picture and sends it to Capitol. Capitol sends it. So he says, come up with something else using that picture. So Capitol says, look, we can get rid of the background. So they send Brian a white, picture, or, white background with the trunk cover cut out. Brian looks at it and there's a picture of Brian looking at it. It's just a mock-up. And where is he doing it? He's doing it the same day that the video for Paperback Writer is shot. How do we know that? Because of the background. Now, what happened the day before that? They shot the video for Rain and Paperback Writer at Abbey Road Studios. What do we see at the beginning of the Paperback Writer? Paul is holding up a transparency of what? A butcher photo transparency. So keep this in mind. The Beatles have already seen black and white pictures from the butcher session. The day before, they have seen color transparencies of the butcher session. And now they're doing these outdoor videos. And Brian says, hey, here's the mock-up for the new album cover. And John looks at this boring white background trunk picture and says, no, I want to use one of the butcher transparencies I saw at Abbey Road yesterday.
I can
And
see
Brian,
that.
yeah. And
Of course.
we don't have a tape recording of what happened.
I
But
can
you
see
can
it.
but you can imagine
Uh-huh.
Brian saying, "No, John, you
Right.
can't do that." And John saying, "Absolutely." And Paul saying, "Yeah, that'd be really hip." And Ringo and George saying, "Yeah, whatever." And so Capitol gets this picture, butcher thing, sent to them. It gets to the Capitol Tower. George Osaki, the art director, is the only one who gets it. And he looks at it and goes, "Hey, this is great." He's an art director. Of course he likes it. And he says, "I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to crop it so that there'll be an empty upper corner where we'll list the song titles and we'll put the title Yesterday and Today. But I'm not going to do it in some dull block letters. I'm going to get this psychedelic looking font and I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to have it textured when they print it so it looks like it's canvas. And we're going to make it like a piece of art." And he's all excited with it. And the sales force looks and they're like, "Oh my God, there is no way that we can put this in stores. Parents will scream bloody murder." And so what happens is they take it to Alan Livingston, the president of Capitol, and Alan says, "We can't put this out." And he calls up Brian. He says, "Brian, there's no way we can put this out." And Brian, who hates the cover and is worried it will ruin the Beatles' image, his marching orders from John are, "That's the cover." And so he has to fight for the cover. And so Alan Livingston meets with the sales force and the production team, and he says, "Look, just run a small number and we'll see what kind of reaction we get." Well, the sales force and the production people go behind Livingston's back and say, "We want the album in the stores. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." So they do, about 750,000 butcher cover albums were manufactured. And of course, the review copies go out and everybody screams bloody murder. Bear in mind,
so to speak, as it were.
Literally.
literally, this is pre-Alice Cooper, Dead Babies, and all that other stuff.
It was 5 years ahead of its time, at least.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And so what happens is Capitol has to recall the cover. Alan calls up Brian. He says, "They won't put it in the stores." And Brian is worried because he thinks, "Oh my God, John is going to be so mad at me because I couldn't get this cover out. Maybe they'll fire me." He's all worried. And basically he and Tony Barrow talk and, I realized, you just tell John, "We tried, it got recalled. It's all we could do." But Alan Livingston asked him a question. He says, "What is this cover about?" And he's told, John thinks it's a statement on war. And John of the 66 tour says, if Americans can accept something as cruel as the war in Vietnam, they can accept this cover. A political statement from a musician, extremely rare back then, an anti-war statement. And also the ironic thing is the American public at that time could accept the war in Vietnam, but not that album cover.
Yeah.
Anyway, John, basically, we get it. Brian takes the transparency in his office, according to Tony Barrow, takes out his cigarette lighter and lights it and burns it in his ashtray. And wonders if he's seeing the Beatles' career go up in smoke because of this incident. So the cover gets recalled, but some of the damage has already been done. And people, and so what does Capitol do? Well, initially, they're going to recall the album and destroy all the covers. It's called Operation Recall. And they have employees come in during the weekend and take the albums out in their inner sleeves and stack them in a corner. And all the jackets go, to be destroyed. Some of them, they're buried in a landfill somewhere outside of Boston. Some in Illinois. They're destroyed. But before all of them are destroyed, somebody at Capitol gets an idea. Cardboard costs money. Cardboard by itself is not offensive. The back cover is not offensive. It just lists the song titles. What if we pasted over a new design? Think of the money we could save. Well, while that's going on, George Osaki has to come up with a new design. What he does is he takes the outlay for the Yesterday and Today butcher cover, that black sheet with the black text. And he takes a trunk design he had and he moves the trunk a little bit to the side. Boom, I'm done. And so the order is trunk, butcher, trunk. So now we're back to a trunk cover. And so that's ready to go. Well, the Capitol production team, they contact the two main companies they use to manufacture their album covers, Imperial and Modern Album. And I think I might be getting this wrong, but I think it's Imperial says, no way. Because there's a problem if we do this. If we use glue that's too strong to hold on that new cover we're pasting over, it'll bleed through the cardboard. It could damage the vinyl. If we use glue that's not strong enough, it could peel off. The other album fabricator company says, of course we can do it. And so they do it. And so when you went to the store, first of all, the butcher cover actually, before it was recalled, was on sale in a very limited number of stores. You might find it at a Sears Roebuck in what we called something that was serviced by what we call rack jobbers. These are people that fill the racks with the records. And so Capitol's distributors never send it out. They got them in time. And also Wallace's Music City in LA, in Hollywood, because its founder was the original founder of Capitol, they have it initially. But what happens is when the recall hits, they pull them all off the racks. And then a week or so later, the album comes out again. Well, some people notice something's not quite right about the way this is. If I look closely behind that white background, I can see what looks like a black triangle. What's the black triangle? It's Ringo's black turtleneck from the butcher cover picture that had been pasted over. And they learn that you can steam it off, and they begin doing it. And so now people, many people have the butcher cover. So that's, the fascinating story behind it. And I'm leaving out a lot of the details that, of course, you can get in the book. Now, what are these butcher covers worth? Well, if you were to have a sealed stereo butcher cover, one recently went in an auction for $112,500.
Oh, wow.
There are not a lot of those out there. If you have what we call a Livingston butcher, which means it was from Alan Livingston's collection and comes with a letter saying so, stereo one like that, I would say would go for $150,000 or more, and could go for $250,000 or more. There are only 4 of them, and it could go for that much.
Do you have one? Do you have one?
No, I
Bruce?
do not. I have butcher covers, but I do not have a Livingston butcher. Now, when I interviewed Alan Livingston, he had one left, and it was a mono one. And he said, yeah, I've got one. Would you like to see it? I said, yeah. And he hands it to me, and he says, yeah, that must be worth $1,000 or so, huh? I said, Alan, at the time it was worth maybe 10. I said, Alan, I would love to take it off your hands for $1,000, but I would feel guilty for the rest of my life. I said, that's got a lot of value, Alan. And when I told him how much, he was, that much? I said, yeah. If I had been dishonest, I'd have something really valuable.
Yeah, no
Probably
joke.
worth 60, 70, 80,000.
Especially if you'd gotten a note from him to go along with it.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. That story alone, Bruce, if you did nothing else in this book, and that was the only thing in this book, that scholarship and that research alone should sell the book out totally and completely, because nobody else has done that.
What you've got is you've got 2 of the Beatles' best albums, Rubber Soul and Revolver, written about.
Yeah.
And then, a 46, 48-page chapter on the butcher cover that
amazing.
Shows all of the essential items. Now, there is a bit of irony in the butcher cover, and that is the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, took the heat in the press, that this was Brian's idea. Brian was into sick humor and pop art, and Brian wanted the butcher cover.
Why would he do that? John would have been more than happy to take responsibility for it.
Because Brian was the manager of the group. And when you're the manager, your boys can't take that hit.
Wow.
So Brian took the hit even though he hated the cover. In the press, Brian was blamed for the butcher cover.
Wow.
Now, what's the ultimate irony? The butcher cover is Brian's fault. Why? Because if Brian had allowed Capitol to put out Yesterday and Today and the blue trunk cover as planned, there never would have been a butcher cover. So, not the way you think of it, but it is Brian's fault.
That's amazing. All right. Well, because people are going to be going out in swarms to get this book, where can they get it? Where can they follow you on social media? And tell us a little bit about what you'll be doing, if you know, at the Fest for Beatles fans.
Well, at the Fest for Beatles fans, I'm hoping to have copies of the book. Right now, as we're taping this, I physically don't have the book. I may or may not. The street date for the book is October 10th. But what I want you to know is if you order from my website, you will get it as soon as we get it and can pack it and send it out. And the printer is telling me that they hope to have the book for us anywhere from 4 to 7 weeks early. So as you're watching this show, hopefully we'll have the book. And yes, you can get it cheaper on Amazon. However, you can't get it this quick. And you also can't get it signed and you can't get it personalized there. And the other thing to bear in mind, if you get it from Beatle.net, that's the website. How easy is that? Beatle.net. No S in Beatles. If you get it from us, we also pack it in bubble wrap and in a sturdy box. We call pizza boxes because the book's is square and it looks like a pizza box, and you get it packed really well. And the other thing is we have a limited collector's edition, which we do only 500 of, signed and numbered, and it comes with extra goodies. It comes in a case. It also comes with some posters and a bookmark and other fun things. And you can only get that through Beatle.net. And we don't like overcharging people. Collector edition books normally are $150 to $250 or more. We sell that for just $100 for a collector's item, instant collector's item. And the regular copy on this book, we had to raise our price from $30 to $40. Not only is everything going up, my printing costs went up 50%, but not only that, but the book's the biggest book we've ever done in the album series, and the licensing costs. Imagine what it costs to license all those wonderful Bob Whitaker pictures. But how can you do a book on the butcher cover without those pictures? You can't.
Right.
That is absolutely splendid, Bruce. That is going to be such a fantastic book. And you're the only person on the planet that I know that can get something shipped early. So
well,
kudos to you.
Well, thank you. We do these self-imposed deadlines, and so far I've made all my self-imposed deadlines. And
Fantastic.
look, and I couldn't do it without the crew that I have. You know, I've got people contributing articles, you know, Al Sussman, Frank Daniels, Piers Hemmingsen, Bill King. I also had, Jude contributing some stuff, all the other fan recollections. And this book, very proud to say that David Leaf, an expert on the Beach Boys, wrote a wonderful piece on Rubber Soul and Revolver and how Brian Wilson was influenced by it. So, you know, some wonderful things, not just my writing, but other people have written great stuff for me, great fan recollections, as always. And my graphic designer, Diana Thornton, has been with me from day one. We've done every book together, and, you know, and she is just phenomenal. She's taught me a lot of the tricks. We're at the point now where I do a lot of the basic layouts on my own and then say, Diana, make it look incredible. And she always does. So it's, you know, these books right now are truly a team effort. I couldn't do the Beatles album series without the team I've assembled and without the fans who send in the fan recollections. The book would not be the same. Our buddy Tom Frangione tells me when he gets the book, the first thing he does is he flips to the fan recollections because, you know, Tom, he knows all this, you know, he knows all that other stuff for most of it, but it's the fan recollections he enjoys because it's a fresh perspective on this that he hasn't read yet.
Absolutely. Well, it's a very impressive feat. So everyone go to Beatle.net to get your copy reserved, and everyone will be in for quite a treat. We cannot wait to see you at the Fest for Beatles fans. You will be in person.
Yes, and I'll know a little bit of what I'm doing. I
Okay.
will be doing a presentation on Magical Mystery Tour Yellow Submarine, which is a really fun presentation. And if you lived in the US, you didn't realize how these projects were joined together. If you were in the UK, you got that impression. And the songs recorded during what I call the productive post-Pepper period, that those,
PPP.
yeah, Peter Pedersen's Pet Pig Porky, whoops, wrong group. Anyway, what they do is you see the Beatles, the first song released from that is All You Need Is Love. And that song is broadcast throughout the world via satellite, which was something brand new in those days, recorded live in Abbey Road Studios. The last song they released from the album, not the album, I mean these sessions, which is right before they went to India, was Across the Universe. And 40 years after that song was recorded, that song is literally beamed by NASA across the universe. So
Wow.
that post, that really it's that post-Pepper period is very productive. I'll also be on a panel with Mark Lewis, and assuming he's able to get to the fest, which we believe he is, and what we'll do on growing up with the Beatles, where we talk about what it was like, because it was so different in the US. His experience and my experience was so different. We talk about that. I'll be on panels with, I'm sure, with Al Sussman and others. And I'm really looking forward to being on the different panels with all of my friends. And of course,
Absolutely.
seeing people who I haven't seen since COVID.
Right.
Yeah, we can't wait to see you too. We're counting the days. So August 12th through the
Absolutely.
14th, guys, you got to be there.
The Fest for Beatles fans. So we're going to go ahead and sign off. Bruce, thank you so much for your time today. It was fantastic to see you and speak with you. We can't wait for the new book.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it as always.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. It was a treat.
It was absolutely a treat. So if you're getting ready for the Fest for Beatles fans, you are going to be in for a treat. You're going to see Bruce and the likes of many other great, great Beatles people. So Mark and Carol Lapidos promise that at the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans, that a splendid time is guaranteed for all, and they always deliver, just like Amazon. So if you haven't made reservations, do so, pack your bags, and we will see you there. So until then, thank you so much for tuning in to She Said, She Said. We treasure you so much for being a part of our show. Please like and follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and we will stay in touch. And until we meet again, here's to food for thought, food for the soul, food for the love of rock and roll.
Ta-ra and shine on.